Welcome back to the show, back to talk about something that is incredibly important. And you can imagine that caregivers have had such a difficult time, especially during the pandemic. And a new report, annual report, has just been released by the Ontario Caregiver Organization. I'm joined by its CEO, Amy Coupal. Amy, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Amy, tell us a little bit about the Ontario Caregiver Organization, what your mission is and what you do.
Sure. So the Ontario Caregiver Organization supports Ontario's estimated 3.3 million caregivers. Those are family members, friends, or neighbors who are supporting someone with a physical and or mental health challenge. So these are not people who are paid healthcare professionals. These are people who've really taken on the role of caregiver to support maybe an aging parent, maybe a child with a disability, or a spouse who's ill, and making sure that they have all of the care that they need before, during, and after care by a healthcare provider, whether that's a surgery or an ongoing treatment for a chronic condition. So caregivers are a really important part of our society, and that's why we exist.
Let's talk about that annual report I mentioned off the top. There are some interesting findings, and I'd like you to share some of those findings with us.
Yeah, I mean, this is really interesting this year. We've done the Spotlight report for 3 years in a row now. And while we weren't surprised by the results that we saw this year, it is concerning. So we see significant increases in the stress level of caregivers, the numbers of caregivers who are burnt out, the challenges that caregivers are facing balancing work and care or family and care, as well as the financial impacts on caregivers. So pretty much by every measure, caregiving has become a more challenging endeavor in the last year. And so it really raises alarm bells for us because we want to make sure that caregivers have the support that they need to continue to do what they want to do, which is provide care for the person that they help.
Yeah, let's talk about that support then from a couple of different perspectives. Number one, what about employers? And a caregiver, I'm sure sometimes may be a little intimidated or not necessarily want to approach their employer to tell them the difficult situation that they find themselves in as a caregiver. But I think it's probably essential to their mental health.
It is. And what we know from Spotlight and our ongoing engagement with caregivers is that the vast majority of caregivers do work, either full or part-time. And many of them are hesitant to speak to their employer. In fact, 1 in 3 caregivers, as we see in our Spotlight report this year, are worried about losing their job. Interestingly enough, a similar number of caregivers are considering leaving their job because of their caregiving responsibilities. So I think both of those stats really speak to the importance of having this dialogue with employers. Caregivers can visit our website at ontariocaregiver.ca. We have resources for them about how to talk to your employer, what some options might be, and how to work through that process. But we also have information for employers because we want to help them understand caregivers and caregiving and how it can actually be a benefit to them as an employer to talk with their employees about their caregiving responsibilities and find a mutually beneficial solution.
Well, and some may be more comfortable even approaching coworkers. If that is the case, how can coworkers help support a caregiver?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things we did in our Spotlight report this year is we actually explored this question of how can you support a caregiver? The number one thing is to check in with that caregiver about how they are doing. So we often ask someone in that caregiving role how the person that they're caring for is doing without thinking that the person who's providing that care may be facing stress, challenge, physical or mental health impacts of their caregiving role. So if you do nothing else, I would say check in, ask how they're doing. Caregivers tell us that things as simple as a cup of coffee or that outreach really help. And then if it's possible to provide some practical supports, that really makes a difference too, whether that's making a meal, walking a dog, watering plants, those things that stretch us in our time, those can really be supports for caregivers as well.
Yeah, great advice. Amy, really appreciate you joining us on the show today. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks for having me.
Reminder, that is ontariocaregiver.ca, a fantastic resource for caregivers out there. If you know somebody in your family that's a caregiver, share that information with them. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.